Well, hi everybody. Welcome to our final module, which is facilitating effective meetings. And I hope you've enjoyed the previous 5 modules, and probably more to the point, you've had a chance to actually apply some of the things that we've attempted to learn. So this module is as important as any other module that we've run in the 6, because I think facilitating effective meetings is really what leadership is often about, because we obviously attend a lot of meetings, and as a leader you would also be required to run a lot of meetings as well. Alright, so let's get underway. I'll just turn off the webcam for the time being so I'm not distracted, and perhaps you as well. Okay, I'm assuming that the audio is working well. If it's not, perhaps someone might like to let me know. But let's move on anyway. So as I said, this is the 6th module, and I think it might be opportune, being our last module, just to recap on what we've done in this particular program, which we started a while ago now on August 19. And we looked at on August the 19th, we looked at the ingredients of effective feedback, and I really wanted you then to go out and give more feedback, both positive and negative, and I've had some very good stories coming back of people that have tried this and getting good results. So pleasing to hear. The whole point about this is to try and build on each of these modules so that you're doing, you know, as you go through the program, you're doing more and more of each thing. We then, in Module 2, I got you to fill out a diagnostic, you might recall, which was really to show you what your influencing strategy, or your preferred influencing strategy was. And you might recall we had investigation, calculation, motivation, and collaboration as the 4 main influencing strategies. And the whole purpose of that module is really to say to you that if you want to be even more influential than you currently are, the idea would be to try all 4 approaches and to use all 4, even though you and I both favour one of those approaches perhaps over the other 4 or the other 3. And as I mentioned in Module 2, influencing is about doing things ethically and transparently. This is not about manipulation. We're not trying to manipulate people. Then in Module 3, we looked at optimizing team performance, and essentially the key point out of that module was really to say that most people working in the workplace these days respond extremely well to 3 dimensions: automate, to have autonomy, to have purpose, and to have mastery. And what essentially I mean by that is that people want to have the freedom to decide how they do things, within reason, of course. There are certain things that have to be followed by regulation. But where there's an opportunity to make decisions about doing things in certain ways, people want that opportunity. Secondly, people want to feel that they can master what they're doing, and that is around skill development. And they want to feel that they can continue to grow and develop in what Abraham Maslow calls self-actualization. And the third thing they want is purpose. They want to understand how their unit of work actually fits in with the big picture. And so what that means, of course, is that leaders have to explain the why of work. You know, why are we doing such and such? What is the rationale or the purpose? All of those things are critically important. Then we moved on to getting the best out of people, and you might recall I shared with you some motivational strategies around how to get the best out of people. There is no one strategy, unfortunately. If there was, we'd all be good at it. But I threw a number of things at you and asked you to try some experiments and try to do some things. You might recall in Module 4 we finished up with some very practical tips on what you need to do based on all those theoretical models. Module 5, which wasn't long ago, on the 28th of October, we we talked about the notion of understanding people and their personalities. What I mean by that is that I shared with you a fun little process and got you to complete another diagnostic which is really around the four animals: the bull, the peacock, the lamb and the owl. And basically the message there was pretty clear, and that was treat people how they want to be treated, don't treat people how you want to be treated. So that became critically important there. So today, of course, we're going through facilitating effective meetings. I'm making an assumption that you lead a team, and if you lead a team, there's a good chance that you have to meet with that team. Sometimes you might have to meet with that team virtually, that is, via technology. Other times you might, and most of the time still I think, you'd meet with them face-to-face, usually in a scheduled situation. Okay, so that's the program. So let's get underway with meetings. What I suggested as homework for last time, just before we move on to meetings, was to try some new approaches to leading people with an emphasis on their personality type. So I'd be quite interested to hear. As I say, I'm always welcome to feedback, and you are most welcome to email me and let me know any successes or frustrations that you've had in relation to trying to deal with people how they want to be dealt with, which of course is the platinum rule, which is exactly what I'm referring to here. So what we should be doing is treating people how they want to be treated, not treating people how we want to be treated, which of course is the golden rule. And if we can just get ourselves into that frame of mind about treating people how they want to be treated, we will actually get much, much better results. In fact, significantly better results, because we're treating people how they want to be treated, which is really important. Okay, so moving right along. So what are we covering basically in this short session? Well, I want to talk a little bit about the context of meetings. Let's just understand why we have meetings, what the cost of meetings are, what is the productive part of meetings. Then I'd like to talk a little bit around structuring of meetings. Then I'd like to talk a little bit around some of the interpersonal and leadership skills that you can use in your meetings, and perhaps a couple of ideas on how to enrich your meetings that I know worked, because I've applied them myself and I've also seen them applied in workplaces. So 4 things. So I'm hoping in this short session that you will be able to go away with here equipped with a couple of tools to make your meetings even more effective than they currently are. So first thing I think we probably need to understand is that getting good at running productive meetings is one of the most critical and untapped skills of any leader. Now that's a quote from me, not from anyone else. I would argue that you have a responsibility to get good at running meetings. We all spend our life in meetings. You could argue this is a meeting. When we're finished here, you're going on to another meeting, and then another meeting, and then another meeting, and it never ends. So our life is actually one long meeting, or a whole series of meetings, if you like. And let's face it, you and I both know that most of the meetings we attend are dead, dull and boring, and are of little use and are quite unproductive. So my challenge to you as a leader is to actually learn to get good at them. Why? Because you'll stand out. You will stand out from the crowd, and people will acknowledge and recognize that. It is an extremely important skill, and what's perplexing to me is it's not a very difficult skill to learn. There's no great art in running meetings. It can be done quite simply with a few simple rules and a few simple tools. And what I want to do is share with you some of those from my own experience today. Okay, so another thing that you probably need to recognise is that meetings themselves are not productive. It's what happens or doesn't happen between meetings that determine the effectiveness of a meeting. Have you ever thought about that? Meetings themselves, in and of themselves, are not at all useful. What the meeting is really attempting to do is to set up some particular structures and priorities that need to occur before the next meeting. So in other words, what that means essentially is what happens between the meetings is critically important. And so there are a few things we can do in meetings to make sure that action plans happen. We have all attended meetings where we've had a good old talk fest, and then what's happened after it is nothing. And then our morale drops off, it creates a downward spiral of negativity, and people kind of lose faith in the whole notion of meeting again because nothing really happened. So it's really important that we be absolutely crystal clear about what needs to happen before we meet again. And we need to have mechanisms in place to make sure that those things are followed through. So have a think about that. The meetings themselves are really a catalyst to create an effective and efficient process by which productivity gains can be made. The meetings themselves are not that process. It's really a part of the planning process. So if you think about it, the meetings that you and I attend and the meetings that you and I lead have basically got probably one of 7, if not more, objectives. Now, the meeting that I'm holding today, which essentially is online, is a meeting around informing, essentially. So it's about giving you some information to help you improve your leadership practice. It's also perhaps a little bit of education as to how we might actually run our meetings more efficiently and effectively. And I guess it's, those are the 2 primary issues around us meeting today. But also, meetings are involved and have a purpose in engaging people. So in other words, we might be sharing ideas, sharing perspectives, considering different approaches, and so forth. So the engagement part is really important. I think this is the part that's often let down, that we always find a small minority of people, sometimes a large minority and even a majority, of people who aren't engaged in meetings. And that's a problem, because it means that 1 or 2 people might be dominating the meeting and the others are just passively sitting there, not really adding anything to the meeting quality at all. Meetings can also have an objective to solve collective, to resolve collective problems. So the idea is that we can throw a problem on the table and start to consider how we might tackle it. So in a project environment, for example, that would be critically important. Unfortunately, we don't do enough of this. What normally happens is we still have the view that the leader's the one that comes up with the decision, and then they report what they've decided to the meeting in due course. But I would suggest that we should be doing more collaborative problem solving in meetings for lots of reasons, which I hope will become very evident as we go through this session. Another reason that we have meetings is to review our progress, and this of course is a very common work in progress type of approach. So the idea would be that each person would report back and inform their colleagues about their progress or otherwise in relation to achieving a particular goal or achieving an objective. So those meetings are obviously very commonplace, and I think frankly they're being overdone. I'm not suggesting for a minute we shouldn't have work in progress meetings, but I think sometimes we over-rely on that particular aim of meetings, and therefore we don't we don't get a chance to do some of the other things that are mentioned there on the screen. Of course, meetings are there to make decisions as well, and sometimes those decisions are made by you as the leader based on the quality of information that you hear back from those people sitting around the table. So there's probably other purposes of meetings too, but I think what I'm hoping to do is to give you an opportunity to actually expand and build on those 7 purposes rather than just rely on one, such as review progress or keep people informed, which are the 2 typical ones. I'm not suggesting again for a minute that those things aren't important. We do need to review progress, and we do need to inform people of decisions that are being made at higher levels. But that's only 2 of 7. And so there are other aspects of the meeting that become critically important as well. Okay, now the other thing that I want to say about meetings before we get into some of the tools that you can use to make your meetings more effective is that meetings cost a lot of money. I don't know if you've actually thought about this, but they are a hugely costly exercise. And the problem is that those costs aren't normally in the balance sheet. You know, we don't actually see them on a piece of paper or in a budget. They're kind of hidden costs, but just because they're hidden doesn't necessarily mean that they're not real. They are very real. Let me give you some examples of what I mean by that. I would strongly recommend that you do this exercise in your organisation, particularly with your colleagues and team members, because it's a real eye-opener, and I'll show you an example of the costs of meetings once I've given you these questions to consider. So think about this. What's the average income of your team? So if that's not hard to work out. Just work out what their annual salary is and then divide by 365 days, which will give you their daily rate, and then divide by 8 and you'll get their hourly rate. So work out what the hourly rate is of each person sitting around the table at your meeting. That's the first important thing, including yourself, of course, because you're obviously leading those meetings. Secondly, how many meetings on average do your team members attend per week? Now, I'm not only talking about the meetings that they might attend in relation to you and perhaps a typical weekly meeting, but what about the other meetings that they attend, perhaps in other departments or with colleagues? So we need to calculate all that. And then we need to work out what typically how long do the meetings last. So are they an hour on average, 2 hours? Are they sort of, some are 10 minutes, some are 3 hours? What's the average? So trying to work that out just to give you an approximate cost. So you could actually run a meeting just with these questions and just ask people, and just to highlight the really fundamental issue about the cost of meetings. So how many have you got in your team? Now, if you've got 6, then obviously if 6 people are attending a meeting, then each of them and their hourly rate has to be costed into that meeting, plus yours, of course. And then finally, and this is the hidden, very hidden cost, while everybody's meeting with you, sitting around a table, no doubt, they're not actually doing other things. Sometimes they are, of course. They might be looking at their emails, but essentially they're not doing their core business. So that has to be taken into account. So there's an opportunity cost as well for people that meet around a table. So because they meet around a table, and let's say they meet for an hour, that is not an hour of time that has to be accounted for. It's actually 2 hours for each person, because what it means is that while they're sitting there, they've missed an hour when they could be working on something that may well be additional core business. So let me give you an example. It's quite sobering when you actually have a look at this, and it really does make a very interesting statement. So let's say, and I'm being very conservative here, but let's say that the average dollar figure per person per hour in a team is $31.25. Let's just imagine that that's the case. That includes you as their leader. It's probably more than that, but let's just work with that. Let's imagine that the people in your team have 5 meetings per week. Now you might say, well, we don't meet as a team 5 times a week. No, you may not. You may meet once a week. You may even meet once a fortnight. But I'll guarantee that in that team there are people who will meet. In fact, statistics show us that a quarter of our time is taken up at meetings at the bare minimum. So for somebody that works 40 hours, what are we talking? 8 hours of meetings a week, bare minimum. And then we've got how long each meeting might last. So let's, arguably say 2 hours, which is of course 10 hours a week for each person. We happen to have 6 people in the team, and because we've got 6 people in the team working on a basis of 10 hours a meeting, we have to double our cost, because while they're in meetings, they're not doing the rest of their work. So what dollar figure could you put on that calculation? It's not hard to work out. I did this, of course, before, and here's the figure. For 6 people, the annual figure, so that's extrapolated over 12 months, the annual figure for a team of 6 people with an average hourly rate of $31.25, hitting that amount of time, which isn't an unreasonable amount of time, is costing your team, if you're the leader, $195,000 a year. Now, that's not written down anywhere, and you might say, well, out of sight, out of mind, but that is in reality what it's costing your small team to do business in a meeting environment. Now that in itself is not a major concern. $195,000 a year for a small team to meet is not really a major issue. The real issue is, are we getting $195,000 worth of benefit by sitting around the table having meetings? That's the real question. And obviously if the answer to that is yes, then $195,000 is well spent. So, you can see that you can quantify this very easily. Have a think about this one though, it's a bit more sobering. Let's say that we have an organisation with 1,000 people in it, and I've got some people online here who are in organisations that are of several thousand people. So let's just take 1,000 people. There's 1,000 people, these figures hold true. So what's the figure per annum for meetings? $32.5 million a year is spent on the activity of meeting. $32.5 million. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of money that could be spent on a whole bunch of many things. Please don't get me wrong. I'm not for a minute suggesting we shouldn't have meetings. In fact, it's absolutely essential we do. But I just want to shake people out of their complacency to say this is why we're banging on about meetings for an hour over lunch, because the reality is that is a lot of money. And I guess if it did become a line item in the financial figures, I can guarantee that somebody in head office or somebody who happens to be your manager would be asking questions around whether that $32.5 million is money well spent. So you can see that it's a costly exercise, but not necessarily a waste of time, but it is, of course, if we have dead, dull and boring meetings. Okay. So that's the whole process around meetings. I don't want to labour on about that. I think we'd all recognise that meetings are very commonplace, that we probably need to be more effective at them, and that we attend perhaps too many of them. I think we all acknowledge that. So here's a couple of tips on the structure of meetings that are critically important. There was a bit of a trend, I don't know, about a decade ago, I think, where people said, why don't we rotate the chair? So in other words, we give everybody an opportunity to chair the meeting. I think this is a really bad idea. I think that, frankly, if you're the leader of your team, it is a core responsibility for you to lead your team. So I would strongly recommend that you don't rotate it. By rotating it, all you're going to do is antagonize people. You're not really going to engage them. They're probably going to be a bit disappointed that they've got to be chairing meetings. How about you just take responsibility for doing that and just do it really well? Just as it's not, you wouldn't rotate performance management to your team members. You wouldn't rotate anything that was in that leadership realm. So don't do this. I was working with a CEO of a company who told me that he never sat at the head of the table in a meeting. And I said, why? And he said, because I wanted to be one of the team. I wanted to be seen and perceived as one of the team. I said, big mistake. You are the leader of the team. Sit at the head of the table. Everybody expects you to. Everybody will want you to. And frankly, that's your job. So let's get it clear. People are expecting you to lead meetings and they expect you to chair meetings. So I think you should be the one at the head of the table chairing your meetings. So if you're rotating, get out of that habit and just take the responsibility back, because the meetings will be of high quality, much better quality as well, because not everybody else will have been privy to the information that you've got for this lunchtime session. Here's another very important tip, is it's really, really important to try to balance reporting and discussion. Now what I mean by that is reporting is of course getting work in progress and hearing around the table what people are doing, and that's really important. I'm not suggesting for a minute that that's not important, and you'd probably do that by asking each person to report on their activity over the past week. And there's a lot of value in that, because not only are you hearing what people are doing, everybody else around the table is hearing what people are doing. However, some meetings are just absorbed by reporting, and that is a huge waste of opportunity, because it's not actually adding any value. If you think about it, all it's doing is just reporting, just communicating. So here's the rule of thumb. Try, if you can, to go 50% reporting and 50% discussion. Now, in order for that to happen, you've got to know what to discuss, and you've also got to be able to roll back your reporting process, unless of course you double the time of meeting, and as we can see from the figures before, that's probably not a very good idea. So how can you reduce the amount of content in the reports that each person actually gives at the meeting? I'm sure there's a way. I'm sure it's possible. So have a think carefully about that, and if you're not sure, then at the next meeting, throw that open as an item of discussion. Just say to your team, I'd like to have more discussion in our meetings, and in order to do that, we need to just reduce the reporting process. How are we going to do that? And just have a discussion around the table on what you might do in order to do that. So you've got to reduce the reporting process for a start. And then the second thing is, what are you going to discuss? Well, I'm sure there's plenty of things that can be discussed. And hopefully, you know, as I go through this session and finish the session today, you'll have a few other things to discuss. But there might be a critical incident that occurred 2 weeks ago that needs to be debriefed. Or we've just had somebody being very successful in the work that they've done. Why can't we actually use that as an opportunity to discuss how we might implement their processes in the work we do? So let's remember that what people will value and indeed get most out of in a team meeting will be the discussion. It won't be the reporting. Okay? In fact, most people just tune out when the reporting's on, so let's be honest. People aren't often listening. Now, so let's make the report short, sharp, and to the point, and let's actually engage in some real dialogue. You'll find that you will enjoy it better, but more importantly, so will your team, and you'll get something really useful out of it because people will be more engaged. All right, so as a general rule, 50% reporting, 50% discussion. Okay, moving right along. Now, I mentioned this just a moment ago, but you have a golden opportunity to use critical incidents in your meetings. So what I mean by that is that if something went really well or didn't go so well, why couldn't you actually use your meetings as a debrief? Now, you might set up some rules and say, look, I don't want a situation where we're blaming anybody, assuming it wasn't a good situation. This is not about blame, but this is about learning from something that's occurred and trying to get some handle on it so that we can actually improve what we do next time. It's hard for people to argue with that. And I often think that using a critical incident, you can put it on the table, and what you can do is you can say, look, there's 3 key questions in this. It's called an after-action review. The first question is, what went well? So even if it was an absolute disaster, there must have been something in the incident that went well. So start on a high note. Secondly, what didn't go well? I'm sure there'll be plenty to be said on that because most of us are prone to talk about the negatives about what didn't go well in a meeting. Thirdly, what will we do differently when faced with similar circumstances, or what will we do next time? So the third question is the critical one, because what that does is it creates a learning team. The team are actually around making sure they don't repeat the same mistakes of the past. Now, if you've got a success story, then you can use the same process. And we just don't do enough of this. We go on to the next thing and the next thing, and we're worried about embarrassing people at the meeting. As I said, you can actually take people out of the equation and just talk about the incident purely from a learning point of view. And it works really, really well. I did this with Qantas years and years ago. We had in the room, we had flight attendants, we had pilots, we had engineers, we had customer service officers, we had administrative people, we had sales people, we had everybody. We had a slice of the organisation. And I mentioned a critical incident that happens quite a lot in airlines, and that is a plane that's grounded unexpectedly. So when that happens, of course, certain things have to happen. And my job was to facilitate a discussion about that critical incident. And so I opened it up by saying, all right, the plane's grounded in Sydney, and what happens next? And the pilots would say, oh, well, that's the flight attendant, that's the head flight attendant. They need to make an announcement in the cabin about what's happened. And the flight attendants would say, well, surely that would be a role that the, that the chief pilot would announce because they have the clout being at the front of the plane. And then, so we'd have this conversation, and then the engineers would be impatient because they'd want to get on and fix the plane. And the salespeople would be wondering how they might reallocate people and so forth. So it was a really, really fruitful discussion to align everybody's roles and responsibilities in the team. So, I mean, that's on a grand scale, but on a smaller scale, what sort of things have gone on in the week that you could talk about as a critical incident? Now, that would be a discussion, and could be a very, very useful discussion. Set a rule that there's no finger pointing or blame or no negativity. Just make it clear. Just say, I don't want any finger pointing, I don't want any blame. I simply want to discuss this so that we can be better informed the next time round. And I think that's fair and reasonable, and most people would accept that. And should somebody jump in and start pointing fingers, you can just gently stop them and say, no, remember what I said, this is not about apportioning blame, this is about actually analysing what we did well, what we didn't do well, and what we can do better next time. All right, so there's plenty of critical incidents that can be put on the table. Whoop, I went too far there, just go back one. All right, now the other thing that I think is really important, particularly with cross-functional teams, although most of you in this webinar today would be involved with teams in functional areas. In other words, everyone's kind of doing the same thing. However, how well do you think each person around the table actually knows the business of other people and what their job is and where their responsibility starts and ends. In short, do they know what everyone's role is? I think you'd be unpleasantly surprised at how ignorant your team members are of what each colleague around the table does. And that's a problem, because it means that people will start making assumptions when people haven't done something right and so forth. So how about we use our meetings to clarify people's roles and responsibilities? So how can you do that in a very interesting way? Well, how about getting one person in the team for each meeting, so everyone has a go at this, to spend 5 to 10 minutes talking about the work that they do and some of the challenges they face and some of the wins that they have accomplished and some of the frustrations that they face. Wouldn't that be interesting? That's discussion. And you can actually find out a lot more about the work that people do, and the people presenting obviously will feel better because they'll now know that other people are very clear of what their role and responsibility is, or certainly clearer than they were in the first place. So meetings can be very powerful to getting people to share with the rest of the team what their role is and what their role isn't. And if you do that well, people are going to be much clearer around the boundaries of people's responsibility. Okay. Now, I don't doubt that some of you would use this strategy, and if you don't, I'd highly recommend it. For those of you who have short, sharp, weekly work-in-progress meetings, can I strongly urge you to do this standing up, not sitting down. If people are standing up, 1, they're more alert. 2, believe it or not, they're more likely to contribute. And 3, the meeting people will be more to the point. So they're less likely to waffle on because they're standing. And no one wants to be standing around for hours on end. So stand-up meetings are extremely powerful. The other thing that's interesting about stand-up meetings, as you can see the picture on the page there, is the other thing about stand-up meetings that are really powerful is you notice there's no desk or barriers between people. That in itself helps greatly with communication. So it can be very, very useful. So I wouldn't be using this all the time, but where you, say every Monday morning, have to have work-in-progress meetings, and those meetings are normally around a table where people come into an office and sit around, why not just have them standing up in the hallway or somewhere? Well, not the hallway, it might not be safe, but somewhere where people can meet, but not sitting down. That works really, really well. Now, I would argue if it's worth meeting, it's worth having an agenda. Why am I saying that? Well, you saw the cost of what meetings cost. So if there's a high cost for meetings, then having a plan about how the meeting should be conducted should be straightforward. So yes, have an agenda. It's very important. And it's also courtesy because it lets people know what you intend to be discussing in the meeting. A couple of tips on agendas that are really important. Get the agenda out early before the meeting so that people are aware of what will be discussed. That's not hard. Do that via email. 2, put your most important item on the agenda right through to your least important. So in other words, start with the things that are important so that you've got plenty of time to discuss those. And the things that are less important, if you miss out, they can go into the agenda for the next meeting without any great problem. The other thing that people don't do, which is common sense in my view, is to have a time limit for each part of the report. So for example, you might have the word reports and then you put after it in bracket 10 minutes, close of bracket. So this gives you the authority to push people along if they're waffling, and you can actually say, look, we've only got 10 minutes for this, as you can see from the agenda, so can you get to the point please? It's far more courteous and efficient to do that than to just say to someone, get to the point please, because they they have no context for what you mean. So put the amount of time each session or each thing on the agenda that you think roughly will take, and that'll give you more authority of running the meetings that way. You know, there are probably a whole range of other things that you can include in your meetings, but it just needs to be a simple agenda with the key points. And if somebody has something that they want to discuss in the agenda, then, you know, by all means you can put that on the agenda. But in fact, that's a good thing. If other people want to bring things up in the weekly or fortnightly meeting, that's great, because it means that the responsibility is being dispersed throughout the team. It's not just the team leader's responsibility. All right, so use an agenda. You might say, well, what about an informal meeting? Well, no, obviously, if you're just meeting in an impromptu sense, you're not going to go away and put an agenda together, but I'm talking about the regular meetings that you have. Now, one of the things that's also not done that can be hugely valuable, as at the end of the meeting, you can delegate this if you want, by the way, but you might like to do it yourself as a leader. You can simply, at the end, if you've taken good notes, is summarise the key outcomes from the meeting. Then it's fresh in everybody's mind as they stand up ready to leave, or just before they stand up ready to leave. If you summarise what people have to do and who does what, you will find that people will walk out saying that something's been accomplished in the meeting, and they'll be accountable for what needs to be accomplished before the next meeting. So if that's not your bag, or you think that I just find that really hard to do, I'm running the meeting and I'm looking after the agenda, then you can delegate that to somebody who's really very good with detail, and just say, look, I want you to keep the key points, and at the end I'm going to defer to you. So you'll say at the end of the meeting, Mary or Joe, do you mind summarising all the things that came out of this morning's meeting? That is much more effective than sending out a wad of minutes via email. You can still do that, but if it's done verbally like that, people tend to remember it more so. So that can be very, very useful. Now, I guess it does raise the question, how long should meetings go for? How long's a piece of string? I think a good rule of thumb is that 1 hour is heaps for a meeting. If you have to meet longer than an hour, it's either a very important in-depth meeting, or you are just dragging things out beyond the hour. So most things can be accomplished in an hour, and so I wouldn't be looking at increasing that. And as you can see from the graph on the screen there, after a while, of course, people's meeting effectiveness drops off as, of course, the length of time increases, because we all get tired. So that's another good reason. So just try to stick to time frames. Start on time, finish on time. It is respectful for other people because they've all got things to do. So don't go over time when other people have to leave and go to other meetings or do other things. So it's really important. So an hour is a good length of time. Sometimes you can have them for less than an hour if it's just a quick where are we at type meeting. Now, one of the things that's often not talked about in meetings is the seating arrangement. Now, we just talked about standing meetings, and that's good. What you can see on your screen is a variety of different seating arrangements. And what's interesting about these seating arrangements is that they will certainly create an atmosphere in the meeting that you may not recognise unless you're aware of it. So, for example, if you look at the theatre style up in the top left-hand corner, that, of course, is a very formal meeting structure. Classroom style, which is kind of like the second one, the classroom or the theatre style, are likely not to get a lot of participation because people are sitting there listening to a so-called expert. The U-shape on the right-hand side is often used in training programs. I personally don't favour it because, again, sort of implies that the person out the front's the expert and everyone's just going to sit there and listen to this expert sprout their particular knowledge. Doesn't work that well. I like the conference setting over in the bottom left-hand corner because that's where everyone's sitting around a table discussing something. That's usually the common one we use. The banquet style is a fairly formal style, but it does allow in-group discussion. So you can have 6 discussions going at once, with that banquet style, and the cabaret style, the same sort of thing. I prefer the cabaret style when I'm running workshops in-house. It adds a degree of informality and relaxes people and gives people a chance to contribute. So I think it's probably likely that you'll gravitate to the one on the left-hand side at the bottom, which is the conference style. But just be aware that seating arrangement has a big deal on the formality that occurs in meetings, and that's really important. Now, one of the things we're talking about, some tips and hints now to how to make your meetings more effective. Why don't you have guest speakers at your meetings? Now, I don't necessarily mean, a motivational speaker at $5,000 an hour or whatever. I'm not talking about that. But why not get someone from another department to come in and talk on a subject matter? For example, what about something going on in HR? What about asking someone from HR to come and address the team on a particular issue, such as the latest legislation around harassment or bullying? What about getting someone from marketing to come in and talk about the work that they do? That enlightens and informs your team members on what's going on around the place. It also gives a forum for somebody else beyond the team to come in and contribute to the quality of the team. You'll find that people will often accept these invitations readily because they recognise it's a wonderful opportunity. So why not try and do that? Of course, even your team members can be guest speakers as well. And as I said before, if you were talking about roles and responsibilities, how about we get one person to talk each meeting, albeit for 5 minutes, on their role and their responsibility, how they see it, what their priorities are, what their challenges are, what some of the things happening in the future will be that will affect their work. So yeah, that adds a lot of variety and interest to a meeting, and it's not hard to organise. It's just a phone call, and you just let the person know what you want from them, let them know how long you want them to speak, and let them know when you want them to speak, and you'll find that that will work extremely well. You don't have to have a guest speaker every meeting, but every now and again it's a very good idea. How about somebody outside industry? There's a lot of people that would be willing to talk to your team, particularly those people in your industry that are aligned with your industry, like other stakeholders. So have a think about that. Be creative. Think about some possible ways that you can implement that. One of the techniques that is critically important, because people often say to me, how do you shut people up in meetings? Well, pretty simple really. If you have a line item on an agenda that gives you a time limit, you can certainly defer to that, but if they won't shut up then, as soon as they draw breath, you simply paraphrase what they're saying. So you say, in other words, what you're telling me is that we need to build up our communication with that other team so that we can make sure that the same mistakes aren't made again. Now, they might have taken half an hour to tell you that, but if you can summarise it, it does 3 things. 1, it checks to make sure that you have got it right, so that's respectful to the speaker. Secondly, it lets the speaker know that you've heard them, which is obviously a good thing, and because they want to know that you've heard the message. And thirdly, and interestingly, you can move the conversation on. So once you've summarised it, you can now move the meeting on to the next item, or how we're going to solve it, or whatever. So it gives the actual person chairing the meeting control of the meeting by doing that. So get good at paraphrasing. It's a really important skill. The other thing people often ask me is, how do I get people to contribute? Really simple. You ask them. So in a meeting you might say, for example, what do people think about the latest whatever? Fred, do you have an opinion on that? Now, Fred may sit there dumbfounded and probably will be caught off guard, but let me tell you this, Fred won't be caught off guard next time, and more so, neither will anyone else around the table, because what they're thinking is, if you're willing to ask Fred that question, you could well be willing to ask me that question. So how about I preempt that and give you an answer? So by directing questions to people is the way to get them to contribute. For example, I might say to someone, Mary, I notice you haven't said anything during this discussion. Is there anything that you would like to add? Now, Mary, of course, might say, no, there's nothing else, but nevertheless, I've been courteous to Mary. There may well be something that Mary would like to add, but she hasn't really felt comfortable about saying something, but by inviting her to say something, I may get her to contribute. So make sure that you get good at those two skills. That's the way to get people involved in meetings, is actually to get people to contribute in discussion. So if someone's sitting there not saying anything, ask them what they'd like to contribute, if anything. That becomes really important. So make sure, look, the sign of a good meeting, frankly, if you want to look for some measurements around this, the sign of a good meeting is that everybody was given ample opportunity to contribute, and not only were they given ample opportunity to contribute, they did contribute. That's the sign of a good meeting. I can assure you, if you showed me any meeting that anybody attended where they said, I got a lot out of that, I'll guarantee it's because it was an interactive, collaborative meeting. That's your goal, ultimately, is to get maximum participation. Now, one of the things you might like to consider is one of the things that I developed in one of my previous books was the Team Values Charter, and this works extremely well, and this could be one of your discussions straight after this particular meeting that we're in. So it's based on 5 questions, and you ask people to bring something to write on and a pen, and you ask them these 5 questions. What is one value that's important to you when we meet as a team? So I might write down, for example, respect. What does it mean? And I might write down, it means that we give everyone an equal opportunity to contribute. 3, why is it important to you? Respect is important to me because I want to feel that I have an equal opportunity to contribute. 4, what behaviours would demonstrate that value? Not interrupting people and giving people a chance to finish their sentence. 5, what behaviours would violate that value? Interrupting people and talking over the top. So once everyone's written down the answers to this, you then go round the room deliberately, or round the table, and you ask each person to read out their responses. You'll be amazed at how powerful and effective this is. And one of the reasons it's powerful and effective is that everybody is given a chance to have a say in the way we conduct ourselves in a team. So you don't have to say, you might say, oh yes, but we've been meeting for years, so you can start this tomorrow. It won't be a problem. You can actually say, I learned something useful in something that I'm doing, and I want to try it out in a team. So there's no problem with that. It'll work really, really well. So there's a thought. Now, something else that you can do that's really powerful is a win for a week, win for the week. So why not start each meeting going around the table and asking people what their win for the week was? Now, we're going to start talking about the problems, so why aren't we talking about the wins? Why aren't we actually talking about things that went well rather than didn't go well? Why not start on a positive note? This isn't Pollyanna. There are great things that happen every week in your team. And if you don't find a vehicle to capture that, such as win of the week, then it's likely to get lost. I can guarantee to you this will work really well. You must set the example, set the tone by you contributing a win for the week. Now, it can be personal or work-related. So it gives people a chance to boast, gives people a chance to talk about themselves, gives people a chance to get to know each other better. It starts the meeting on an upward spiral, not a downward spiral. It's a great technique, strongly recommended, and it's not hard to do. So guys, that brings us pretty much to the end, and I would ask you now, if you've got any questions, if you could just type them in the question box, because we're just about ready to finish. So be quick. If you can type your question in, if you've got anything about meetings that you'd like to share with me and so forth, do that now, or if of course you can do that later if you can't think of anything at the moment. But while you're doing that, or while you're thinking about that at least, your homework is pretty straightforward, and that is for you to implement some new approaches to your meetings. So I've thrown a lot of things at you in a very short space of time. You don't have to do them all, but try something at least, 1, 2, maybe even 3 things, and try and, give them a go. See what happens. Experiment. Be bold. Have a go. Become good at running meetings, because I can tell you, if you become good at running meetings, you will be noticed. And if you're looking at advancing into more senior positions of leadership, being good at running meetings is a very good starting point. So that might be a thought. All right, well, you're a quiet bunch today. There's not much, there's not many, well, there's no questions actually. So, okay, that's fair enough. That could mean one of 2 things. Either I've explained everything really clearly, or I haven't explained anything very well at all and people are confused, or I haven't really collaborated as well as I perhaps should in the discussion aspect of the meeting, so I'm not walking the talk. But never mind, there doesn't seem to be anything there, so we can probably get an early mark today. I'd like to thank all of you very much for participating in the program. I've had a lot of fun running this and designing it, and listening to your feedback in between sessions. If you've got feedback, please, I'd like to hear it. Really good. You can see on your screen there now the 6 modules that we've gone through. And I should also say to you, that, just a quick plug, I have another program starting exactly the same next Friday. So if you, for example, want to go through it again, you're more than welcome. But if there are people in your organisation who you would like to expose to this program, then here's your opportunity. Just send me an email and we'll get you registered, and it'll be a very simple exercise to do. So thank you very much. I've loved working with you, and I wish you all the very best in your running meetings and generally leading. So thanks guys for being in the lunch and learning program. All the very best.